The desert didn't forgive, and neither did the men who rode across it. Eli McGraw stood on the warped planks of his porch, sweat streaking through the dust on his weathered face, watching the horizon shimmer. Heat waves bent the air, making it look like the earth itself was breathing, restless and cruel. He shaded his eyes with a calloused hand, though he already knew what he was staring at. Trouble usually came on horseback, but what came toward him that day wasn't a gang of riders. It was two women. They staggered more than walked, weaving across the hardpan like shadows torn loose from mountains. Tall, proud, even in their exhaustion, their black hair whipped in the hot wind, tangled with blood and dirt. They were Apache. Eli knew it at once, the way a man knows fire when it's burning near. Both carried the marks of warriors. One's arm bound tight with a strip of cloth, dark with blood, the other limping on a swollen ankle. He felt his jaw tighten. Apache on his land. Not a common sight. Most white ranchers feared them, cursed them, or shot them on sight. Eli had done none of those things in his years out here, though God knew he'd lost neighbors to raids. He'd also seen Apache shot down like game by bounty men and soldiers with nothing in their eyes but paid dirt. He should have turned back inside. Let them pass. Let the desert decide their fate. But he didn't. The memory of Mary, his wife, gone these 5 years, wouldn't let him. She'd been the kind of woman who'd stop her horse in the middle of nowhere just to hand bread to a beggar. A man's worth is weighed by who he saves, not who he kills, she used to say. The words gnawed at him now as the women drew closer, swaying, one leaning heavy against the other. Eli stepped off the porch. The ground burned under his boots, each crunch of gravel sharp in the silence. The taller of the two lifted her chin, eyes dark as flint, watching him without fear. She said something low in her tongue, a stream of harsh syllables he didn't understand. The other touched her arm, then looked at him with an expression that, even without words, asked plainly, "Will you help?" Eli's throat was dry. "Damn it," he muttered more to himself than them. He nodded once, sharp, and motioned toward the house. Inside, the air was no cooler, but it carried the faint smell of wood smoke and old cedar. Eli cleared a space on the rough-hewn table, pushing aside his ledgers and a chipped cup. The women followed him in silence, their presence filling the small cabin with a strange, fierce energy. He fetched water from the barrel, poured it into a tin cup, and offered it. The limping one drank greedily, the other watching Eli's every move like a hawk ready to strike. He cleaned their wounds as best he could, tearing strips of cloth from an old shirt. The taller woman hissed once when he pressed too hard on her arm, but she didn't flinch otherwise. Warriors, both of them. He'd seen plenty of men crumble under less pain. They tried to speak, broken English, scraps of words that barely made sense. What he gathered was enough. They were hunted. Soldiers? No. Bounty men, perhaps. Or worse, outlaws. That chilled him deeper than he liked. When the sun dropped low, bleeding red into the horizon, the sisters rested by his fire, silent shadows against the flicker of flame. Eli sat in his chair, shotgun across his knees, staring into the embers. He didn't know their names, didn't know their story, but he knew enough. If men were chasing them, those men would come here. And when they did, they wouldn't care who else they killed. A coyote yipped far out on the ridgeline. Eli's hand tightened on the gunstock. Sleep came in fits that night. He dreamed of Mary's voice, soft and steady, telling him he was doing right. Then gunshots split the dark, real this time. Eli jerked awake, heart hammering. The sisters were already on their feet. One crouched by the door with a knife drawn, the other peering through a crack in the shutter. Voices carried faint through the night. Men's voices. Eli swore under his breath, crawling to the window. He couldn't see much, just shadows moving out beyond the corral. But he knew the sound of trouble as sure as he knew the creak of his own barn door. The sisters looked at him. No fear in their eyes, only readiness. One touched her chest, then his, then mimed a bowstring drawing. Loyalty, clear as words. Eli didn't answer right away. His pulse was loud in his ears. He thought about his land, half-dead cattle, fences falling down, the endless fight against drought. He thought about Mary's grave on the hill. What did it matter if 10 more men came? What did it matter if this was the end of him? Slowly he nodded. The sisters gave no smile, no thanks. They simply settled near the door like sentinels waiting for dawn. The night stretched long, every crack of wood in the fire sounding like a shot. Eli couldn't stop thinking of the faces out there in the dark, rough men with hard eyes and quick tempers. He'd known their kind. Hell, once he'd been their kind, riding with Cray's gang before Mary pulled him out. He'd buried that life, or so he thought. But the past never stayed buried long on the frontier. By morning, the riders were gone. Just a warning, Eli told himself. Scouts testing the ground before the storm. He stepped outside, boots crunching frost-stiff earth, and saw fresh tracks leading back toward the hills. Hoofprints deep and wide. At least half a dozen. He spat into the dirt, jaw set. By noon, word came clearer. A neighbor rode up, old Tom Harlan, breathless and spooked. "You got Apaches in your house, McGraw?" "Word is Jesse Cray's looking for 'em. Says there's bounty money on their heads. Claims they're worth more alive than dead." Eli kept his face stone. "Ain't seen a soul." Tom narrowed his eyes, but didn't push. "Best pray it stays that way. Cray's bring 'em in. You don't want no part of that devil." He kicked his horse and rode off, leaving dust swirling in his wake. Inside, Eli told the sisters. They understood more than he expected. The taller one gripped his arm, fierce, her voice low. "We stay. Fight. No leave." The other nodded, eyes burning with the same fire. Eli stared at them. He should have told them to go, to take their chances in the canyons, vanish like smoke before Cray arrived. But when he opened his mouth, the words wouldn't come. Instead, he said, "Then we'll need to be ready." That night, he sharpened his knives, checked his rifle, and counted the shells he had left, too few by half. The sisters prepared their own weapons, bows strung, arrows fletched with raven feathers. The firelight gleamed off their faces, stern and calm, as if this was the life they had always known. Hunted, cornered, but unbroken, Eli thought about Mary again, about the son they never got to raise, buried before he could walk. Loneliness had hollowed him for years, eating away slow as rust. But now, with these two strange, wounded warriors in his home, he felt something stir that he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. The desert night was still when the sound came. Horses, distant but sure. 10 riders, moving fast, the faint glint of rifles under the moon. Eli stepped to the doorway, shotgun resting against his shoulder. The sisters rose beside him, tall and silent, their shadows stretching across the dirt like spirits summoned to stand guard. 10 guns, 1 poor rancher, and 2 Apache sisters who refused to run. The desert held its breath, and Eli McGraw braced himself for the storm. The dawn came slow, bleeding pale light over the desert and painting Eli's ranch in long, sharp shadows. He had not slept. Neither had the sisters. They sat by the dying fire, silent, their eyes hard on the window, as though the night itself still held enemies. When the sun crept over the ridges, Eli stepped out with a shotgun and stared at the horizon. Dust moved there, faint but certain. Riders? He didn't have to count to know. 10, maybe more. His hand tightened on the stock. He could feel Mary's voice echoing in the back of his mind, telling him a man's worth was tested when it cost him most. Well, the test had come. By mid-morning, Jesse Cray and his gang rode into view. They spread out like wolves, circling near the corral. The lead rider, Cray himself, was a broad man with a face cut deep by scars and a grin that carried no humor. He raised a hand, and the others reined in. "McGraw." Cray's voice rolled across the distance. "Word is you got something that belongs to me." Eli stepped forward, shotgun resting across his arms. The sisters stood just inside the door, shadows of steel behind him. "Ain't got nothing of yours." Cray laughed, a dry, grating sound. 2 Apache women passed through here last night. Tall, strong, worth a mighty fine price, alive or dead. You mean to tell me they didn't come knocking? Not a soul. The lie hung in the heat. Cray's grin thinned. "Funny thing, McGraw. Folks say you're soft. That true? You getting soft, living out here alone?" Eli kept his face stone, but his insides churned. I said I don't have M. Best you ride on. Silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then Cray's hand flicked. A rifle cracked. The bullet slammed into the porch post inches from Eli's head, splinters flying. Eli dropped to one knee, shotgun raised. The sisters burst from the house, bows drawn. The air exploded with gunfire. The fight was chaos. Horses screamed. Dust boiled up. Eli fired, felt the recoil slam his shoulder, saw one rider pitch backward from his saddle. An arrow whistled past his ear, striking another outlaw clean in the throat. The man toppled, gurgling. The sisters moved like storms, swift, precise, deadly. The taller one hurled a knife that buried itself in a rider's chest, sending him tumbling. Her sister loosed arrows so fast they blurred, each one finding flesh. Eli pumped another shell, fired again, dropped a man who'd tried to flank them. He felt alive in a way he hadn't in years, every nerve lit with fire. But they were outnumbered. Bullets ripped through the walls, shattered glass, tore holes in the roof. One grazed Eli's arm, hot pain streaking down. He gritted his teeth, stayed standing. The sisters shouted in their tongue, urgent, fierce, as though calling the spirits of their people to fight beside them. The outlaws pressed harder, circling, trying to flush them from cover. Cray himself hung back, watching with the predator's patience. When Eli's shotgun clicked empty, he cursed, ducked back into the cabin. He fumbled for shells with shaking fingers. The sisters held the doorway, blades flashing. A rider tried to force his way in, and the limping sister drove her knife up under his ribs, twisting. He fell without a sound. Then, just as sudden as it started, the gunfire ebbed. A whistle cut through the smoke. Cray's men pulled back, dragging their wounded, leaving 3 bodies behind in the dirt. Cray sat his horse, calm as a rattler in shade. You made yourself a choice, McGraw, and it was the wrong one. His eyes burned cold. We'll be back, with more guns, and when we come, ain't a soul here that'll walk away. He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following. The thunder of hooves faded into the desert. Eli leaned against the doorframe, sweat pouring down, breath ragged. The sisters stood beside him, blood on their hands, faces unreadable. Together, they watched the dust cloud vanish. The silence afterward felt heavy, like the air before a storm. Eli's arm bled steady from the graze. The taller sister stepped close, motioned for him to sit. He hesitated, but her gaze brooked no refusal. She cleaned the wound with surprising care, binding it tight with a strip torn from her dress. Her hands were steady, her face close enough that he could see the faint scars running along her jaw, marks of battle survived. You fight, she said haltingly, her English broken but sharp. Not like others. Eli gave a humorless snort. Used to. The other sister crouched near the fire, tending her own ankle with quiet determination. She looked up, met his eyes, and touched her chest. Nantan, she said, then pointed at him. Brother. The word hit Eli harder than any bullet. That night, the 3 of them buried the dead outlaws just beyond the corral. The ground was dry and cruel, the work slow. Coyotes yipped in the distance, hungry for what they could not have. When it was done, Eli stood over the graves, sweat running cold down his back. He had taken lives before, but not like this, not in defense of strangers who had chosen to stand beside him. Back in the cabin, they sat around the low fire. The sisters spoke more now, piecing together enough English for him to follow. Their names were Naeli and Tala. They had fled soldiers who had slaughtered their family near the San Pedro River. Cray had hunted them, since, hoping to sell them to the forts for gold. Eli listened, silent, his jaw clenched. He thought of Mary's voice, thought of his son's small grave. Loss was something he knew too well. He poured a measure of whiskey into 3 tin cups and set them down. The sisters drank without hesitation. The hours dragged. Supplies ran thin. The barn roof still smoked from where bullets had sparked fire, though they'd beaten it out quick. Eli looked around his land, broken fences, starved cattle, a house riddled with holes, and wondered what in God's name he was fighting to save. But when he looked at the sisters, saw the fire still burning in their eyes despite all they'd lost, he knew. He wasn't fighting for land or cattle. He was fighting because some things a man couldn't turn his back on. The next day, Eli saddled his horse and rode with the sisters into the foothills to hunt. The desert was merciless. Their boots sank in the sand, the sun flayed their skin raw. They found a stream at last, cold water shining under cottonwoods. Eli knelt and drank deep, the relief sharp as knives in his chest. That night, as they returned, wolves trailed them. Eyes gleamed red in the dark. Eli fired once, the crack splitting the silence, and the pack melted away. But the message was clear. Predators circled from all sides, beast and man alike. At the fire, Tala sat sharpening her knife. Naeli watched Eli with steady eyes. "Cray, come. Many guns." She drew 10 marks in the dirt with the tip of her blade. Then she tapped 3 more. More. Always more. Eli exhaled slow. "Then we make ready?" The sisters nodded. No fear, only resolve. For a long while, none of them spoke. The flames snapped, sparks rising into the night. Eli thought of the man he used to be, riding with Cray's kind, chasing coin with no thought of what it cost. He remembered Mary pulling him out of that life, making him a man again. She was gone, but her lesson lived in these 2 fierce women who had chosen to stand with him. When he finally lay down, his body aching, he closed his eyes knowing tomorrow would bring blood. The desert was too quiet. The stars above glittered cold, watching like witnesses to a trial not yet begun. He drifted in and out of sleep, haunted by the memory of Mary's voice, the weight of his shotgun beside him. And when dawn touched the desert again, the horizon burned with a dust cloud bigger than before. Cray was coming back. 10 riders, maybe more. The desert went silent, as if waiting for blood. The morning broke red as blood over the ridges, the kind of sky that carried omens. Eli McGraw stood outside his cabin with his shotgun across his arms, watching the horizon. The dust cloud he'd seen the night before was closer now, heavy and certain. Jesse Cray was coming, and this time he wasn't bluffing with a handful of men. 10 riders, at least, maybe more. The sisters stood beside him, tall and solemn, their dark hair braided back tight, weapons in hand. Naeli, the taller one, carried her bow strung, a quiver full of arrows slung across her back. Tala limped slightly still, but her grip on her knife was steady, her eyes fierce with a fire Eli had never seen in another soul. The desert stretched wide and silent around them, the air holding its breath. Eli swallowed the taste of dust in his mouth. He had seen battles before, gun smoke hanging thick, men screaming as they fell, but something about this moment pressed deeper on him. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. The riders came into view in the clear light, spreading out as they drew near. Cray rode at their center, his scarred face split by a grin that looked more like a wound than a smile. He carried himself like a man who believed the world owed him, and today he had come to collect. They reined up just beyond rifle range, a line of hard men with rifles and pistols resting easy on their thighs. Dust swirled around their horses' legs. Cray cupped his hands and called out, "McGraw, you had your chance to do this easy. Hand him over now, and maybe I let you keep breathing." Eli stepped forward, voice carrying steady. "They ain't yours to take." Cray's laughter rolled across the space between them, sharp and cruel. "Everything out here's mine if I say so. And you're just a fool standing in the way." He leaned forward in his saddle, eyes narrowing. "You can't stand against 10 guns, McGraw." Eli shifted the shotgun in his grip, his voice low but cutting. "Then count me for 11. The sisters stepped up beside him, tall and unflinching, the sun flashing off the blades in their hands. Together, they made a line, 3 against 10, shadows of defiance against the burning horizon. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The desert was silent, the kind of silence that hummed in the bones. Then Cray's hand dropped. The world exploded. Gunfire cracked sharp and fast. Bullets spat dirt at Eli's boots, punched splinters from the cabin walls. Eli dropped to one knee, fired the shotgun, felt the kick slam into his shoulder. A rider screamed and fell, his horse bolting wild. Naeli loosed 2 arrows in quick succession, both finding their mark, one man toppling backward, another clutching at his chest before tumbling from the saddle. Tala darted forward like a shadow, her knife flashing as she dragged one man from his horse and left him bleeding in the dust. The air was thick with smoke and dust, the smell of gunpowder sharp in Eli's nose. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Bullets whined past his ears. Eli fired again, another outlaw crumpling into the dirt. He rolled behind a water trough, reloading fast, his hands slick with sweat and blood. A bullet tore through his hat brim. Another split the trough beside him, water gushing out in a spray. He cursed, ducked lower, teeth clenched. The sisters moved like spirits, swift and merciless. Naeli shot an arrow straight into a man's eye, dropping him dead before he hit the ground. Tala darted in close to another rider, slashing his leg open, forcing him from the saddle. She finished him without hesitation, blood soaking into the dust. Still the outlaws pressed, circling, firing. The cabin's windows shattered, with splintering. A bullet seared a line across Eli's ribs, hot pain flooding him. But he pushed through it. Rose fired again. Another man went down. They were dropping one by one, but so were the shells in Eli's pocket. He counted under his breath, 3 left, then 2, then 1. Cray spurred his horse forward, bellowing like a bull, revolvers blazing. Kill him! Kill them all! The outlaws surged, the last of them desperate. Eli fired his final shell, dropping one more, then drew the pistol from his belt. His hand shook, but he steadied it, squeezing off shots as fast as he could. One grazed a man's shoulder, another took a horse down, spilling its rider beneath crushing hooves. Then Cray was on him. The outlaw leader thundered in close, leaping from his horse, tackling Eli hard into the dirt. The shotgun flew from Eli's hands, landing yards away. The pistol skittered off into the dust. Eli hit the ground hard, ribs screaming, the wind knocked from his lungs. Cray loomed over him, massive, his scarred face twisted with rage. Should have stayed out of my way, McGraw. His fist crashed into Eli's jaw, white light bursting in his skull. Eli rolled, spat blood, grabbed for a rock, swung it up wild. Cray caught his wrist, slammed it down, his strength overwhelming. The outlaw drew a knife, the blade flashing as he pressed it down toward Eli's throat. Eli strained, every muscle burning, the cold edge inching closer. His arms trembled, strength fading. For a moment he saw Mary's face, soft and steady, telling him to stand. He roared, shoving back with everything left in him. The knife hovered, shaking an inch from his skin. Then an arrow hissed through the air. It struck Cray's shoulder, driving deep. He snarled, staggered, the knife wavering. Eli twisted, snatched the blade from his hand, and drove it home. Cray's eyes widened, breath rattling out. He slumped, heavy, the life leaving him slow. Eli shoved him off, chest heaving, blood hot in his mouth. The battlefield was quiet now, save for the moans of the dying and the whimper of frightened horses. Smoke drifted, curling above the ruined cabin. The sisters stood tall amidst the wreckage, faces streaked with blood and dust, weapons still ready, though no enemy remained standing. Eli pushed to his feet, swaying, the world tilting. Naeli caught his arm, steadying him. Their eyes met, silent understanding passing between them. They had stood together, and they had won. The dead were buried by dusk, shallow graves in the hard earth, marked only by rough stones. Eli stood over them with the sisters, the 3 of them silent, the weight of it heavy on their shoulders. As the last shovelful of dirt fell, the sound of horses drifted from the ridges. Eli's hand went to his empty holster, heart hammering. But what came was not more outlaws. A line of Apache warriors rode down into the valley, their chief at their head. He was an older man, tall and grave, his face carved with lines of command. They reined in near the cabin, dismounted, and approached with measured steps. Naeli and Tala stepped forward, speaking quickly in their tongue. The chief listened, his dark eyes fixed on Eli. When they finished, he nodded once, then turned to Eli and spoke in careful English. "You fought beside my daughters." Eli blinked, stunned. He looked at the sisters, then back at the chief. "Daughters?" The old man's gaze was steady. "You stood against many guns when you could have turned away. For that you are not enemy. You are blood." He placed a hand on Eli's shoulder, firm as stone. "From this day, you are kin to us." Eli felt something stir in his chest, something he had not felt since Mary died. Belonging. For years he had lived alone with nothing but ghosts and broken fences. Now, in the eyes of these people, he saw a place again. The Apache helped rebuild the ranch in the days that followed. The cabin walls were mended, the corral set right. Eli worked beside them, his hands raw, his body aching, but his heart lighter than it had been in years. The sisters never strayed far, always close, always watchful. One night, as the fire crackled under the desert stars, Eli sat with Naeli and Tala. They spoke little, words not needed. He looked at them, then at the chief, then at the land around him, the land he had nearly died to defend. For the first time, he felt it was worth defending. The desert was cruel, unforgiving, but it had given him this: 2 warriors who had stood beside him when 10 guns came, and in the quiet that followed, the narrator's voice seemed to rise from the fire itself. The frontier tested men in fire. Some broke, some burned, but once in a while, a man found his strength in those who stood beside him. Eli McGraw was no hero, no rich rancher, no name for the history books. But when the desert came to claim him, he did not stand alone, and that made all the difference. The fire crackled, the stars burned cold, and the desert kept its silence. The night had fallen heavy over the valley, pressing down with a silence so thick it seemed the earth itself held its breath. A low wind worried the cottonwoods near the creek, their branches creaking like old bones. Ethan Carver stood with his back to the barn wall, his Winchester slung low, his jaw set hard. His ranch, his life's work, lay behind him, shadows stretching long across the dirt yard. Ahead, the flicker of campfires marked the enemy's watch. They were out there, men with greedy eyes and quicker triggers, waiting for the right moment to strike. Beside him stood the sisters, tall, silent, faces carved in stone but eyes alive with fire. Taza's hand rested lightly on her bow, her dark hair braided tight against her shoulders. Nalin, younger but no less fierce, cradled a rifle Ethan had given her. They did not flinch, did not falter. He felt their presence like a wall at his side. And beyond them, at the edge of the firelight, the chief waited. The great man had come not with an army, but with his decision. His people's judgment hung over the yard like thunderclouds. He studied Ethan, measuring his worth, his loyalty, his defiance. Would this white rancher stand alone, or would he stand as kin? Ethan felt the weight of it all pressing on his chest. He had fought cattle rustlers and drought, had buried neighbors who'd been less fortunate. But nothing carried the gravity of this moment. Not just his land, but the blood bond he'd forged with the sisters and the fragile peace of the valley would be decided here tonight. The first shot cracked from the dark. A bullet sparked against the barn wall, splinters flying past Ethan's face. He dropped to a crouch, rifle in hand, heart hammering. The campfires guttered as shadows moved. The outlaws had grown impatient. "They're coming," Ethan muttered. Taza's lips barely moved. "Then we end it here." The chief raised one hand. A single call in his own tongue echoed into the night. Shapes rose from the ground, warriors who had lain hidden until now. Spears, rifles, painted faces. They poured from the tree line like a sudden flood, flanking Ethan's ranch from the dark. The outlaws cursed. They had expected an easy slaughter. Instead, they found themselves caught between fire and steel. Gunfire roared. Ethan fired first, his shot taking a man clean off his horse. He worked the lever hard, every bullet a prayer, every recoil a promise. Nalin's rifle cracked beside him, the report sharp and sure. Taza loosed arrows, so fast they seemed to grow from her hand. Men screamed. Horses reared. Smoke choked the yard. But the outlaws were desperate, mean to the bone. They pressed forward, their bullets tearing into the barn, shattering windows, punching holes in wood. One man broke through the fence, charging with a shotgun. Ethan met him head-on, the Winchester bucking once, dropping him hard into the dirt. Another shadow rose at the porch. Nalin spun. Too slow. Ethan's stomach clenched. The outlaw's revolver leveled at her chest. But Taza's arrow flew true, striking the man's wrist, sending the gun clattering into the night. Nalin's return shot finished him. The sisters moved like fire and water, each covering the other's weakness, each driving Ethan harder into the fray. They were not just allies. They were family now. The battle raged, brutal and close. For every outlaw that fell, two more pressed in. Their leader, a broad man with a scar across his jaw, bellowed over the din, "Take the ranch. Take everything." His greed was louder than the gunfire, and his men fed off it, fighting with the hunger of wolves. Ethan's shoulder burned where a bullet had grazed him. Blood slicked his sleeve, but he fought on, teeth gritted. He thought of his father's words, long buried. A man ain't measured by the land he owns, but by who'll stand beside him when the lead flies. Well, he wasn't standing alone. The chief moved through the chaos like a storm. His voice thundered commands in Apache, his warriors striking swift and hard. Spears found their marks. Rifles cracked in rhythm. The tide began to turn. But the outlaw leader did not break. He surged forward, revolvers blazing, cutting down two warriors in his path. His eyes locked on Ethan, fury etched into every line of his scarred face. Ethan stepped forward, breath ragged, rifle low. The world narrowed to two men, two wills colliding in the smoke and fire. The outlaw spat. "Should have stayed in your barn, rancher. Now, I'll burn it over your grave." Ethan leveled his rifle. His hands shook, blood dripping onto the stock. He thought of the sisters at his side, of the chief's watchful gaze, of the land that had nearly broken him but had also saved him. He whispered, "Not tonight." The outlaw fired first. Ethan felt the searing kiss of lead across his ribs, knocking him back. Pain roared through him, but his finger tightened and his rifle answered. The shot struck home. The outlaw staggered, eyes wide, revolvers dropping useless to the ground. He fell heavy, choking on his own rage, and lay still. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then the outlaws broke. Without their leader, their courage crumbled. They scattered into the night, some cut down by Apache spears, others vanishing into the dark, carrying their terror with them. The yard was littered with bodies. Smoke drifted from smoldering fence posts. Horses whinnied in panic. Ethan lowered his rifle, chest heaving, his wound burning like fire. He tasted iron on his tongue. Nalin was at his side, steadying him, her hands strong despite the tremor in her arms. Taza stood guard, bow ready, eyes sharp. The chief approached, his shadow long across the dirt. He looked at Ethan, then at his daughters. His gaze was unreadable, but heavy with meaning. "You fought," the chief said at last, his voice deep as stone. "Not for land, not for gold, for them, for us." Ethan tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He only nodded, the pain in his side threatening to pull him under. The chief's hand came down heavy on his shoulder, not unkind. "Tonight, you are no longer alone, rancher. Tonight, you are kin." The sisters exchanged a glance, pride and relief shining through their exhaustion. Ethan felt the truth of it settle deep in his bones. He had stood against 10 guns, but he had not stood alone. The warriors began their morning songs for the fallen, voices rising into the night. The flames of the campfires burned low, casting the yard in shifting gold. Ethan swayed on his feet, the world blurring at the edges. Nalin caught him. "You live," she said firmly, though her eyes betrayed her fear. Taza nodded. "A scar to remind you." Ethan gave a faint, bloodied smile. "Another one for the collection." The chief raised his arms, calling his people together. They circled the yard, their song lifting, a solemn vow carried on the wind. The ranch, the land, the valley, it was bound now not by fences or deeds, but by blood and sacrifice. Ethan closed his eyes, the sound washing over him. He felt the ache of his wound, the weight of loss, the fire of survival. But above all, He felt the strength of those who stood beside him. And when he opened his eyes again, he saw not just a ranch scarred by battle, but a home worth every drop of fight. The night eased into silence, broken only by the crackle of dying fires and the low murmur of the people gathered close. Ethan stood, bruised and bloodied but unbroken. He knew tomorrow would bring new trials, storms, rustlers, hunger. But he also knew this: no man ever truly stood alone, not if he was willing to fight for something greater than himself. And so, the tale of that night, carried on the wind, whispered across the valley and beyond, of the rancher who stood against 10 guns and the 2 Apache sisters who stood beside him.